Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindi Baldi, and this is my husband and co-host, Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Hey everyone, exciting news. I am here to unveil, ta-da, the Uncertainty Playbook. Written by Jeffrey Tumlin and Cindi Baldi, it's 14 strategies for work success in a chaotic world. We know that most people aren't very good with uncertainty, and so we combed through the research and ran some experiments in our own work and came up with these 14 strategies that we think could be really helpful for helping you all survive uncertainty and coming out on top. If you're interested in buying the book, it's available on our websites, managementmuse.com and ondemandleadership.com. You can get 20% off if you use the promo code Playbook20. That will get you 20% off and free shipping. So stop on by, and we're wishing you some good reading. Thanks for joining us today on Management Muse. I am your host, Cindi Baldi, and my co-host, Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow.
And today we are going to try to revive arguing's reputation.
Yeah, that's right. Arguing gets a bad rap. There is a lot of mistakes people make when it comes to arguing. The first is thinking arguing is a bad thing. It's not. We will often have differences of opinion, differences of perspective and experience, and think that we should do things a certain way. I'll give you an example. I'll use our mentor, Howard Prince. So one of my first jobs after I got my PhD, he hired me. This actually was my first job after. And basically he hired me to help build a leadership center and didn't have any money. And once I realized that, I told him, like, hey, instead of me teaching classes, let's have me be a fundraiser. And he's like, no. You know, if you're a good teacher, the money will come. I don't need a fundraiser. I need a good teacher. Go out and be a good teacher and we'll make plenty of money. And I was like, well, you know, my parents are both CPAs and I got a better idea. Like, they always told me, you know, if you got the money, you can do what you want. And so why don't we go get the money and then we can do what we want? And so we legitimately argued about this. And at the end of the day, I wasn't persuasive. And so we did it his way. But we had the argument. And you don't have to win him. He had his reasons. He'd been doing this for 40 years at the time. And I had my reasons. My parents pounded into me that money brings options, you know, from their jobs as CPAs. And so we were coming at it from different sets of experiences, different perspectives. And we needed to have the argument. Arguing is not negative. What's negative is fighting. The difference between arguing and fighting is in an argument, you never lose sight of the main point. Where arguments get in trouble is when you lose that main point and you start letting other things you wanted to say, but you've kept to yourself, creep in. And that's what happens often in our personal relationships, where the arguments can be so destabilizing.
I think I have a different way. I don't disagree with that.
Go ahead.
But I'm going to argue.
How appropriate.
I think that it is keeping to the point, but where you go astray is when it stops being about the point and starts being about your ego and winning.
Yeah.
And you're very good at that. I don't sometimes.
Winning?
I don't, no.
Or ego?
Yeah, you don't really let your ego, for the most part, you really don't let your ego get involved.
Well, I tries.
Yeah, you got some talent there. But that's where I see it going more astray, is where it stops being about the actual issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I like this example because I didn't win. I didn't win. It didn't work my way. We went his way. But now looking back on it, and by the way, the center eventually ran out of money and went away. And that's not to say we should have done it my way. I don't look back and say we should have done it my way. I look back and say, I did my job. My job at that moment was to argue. Right. I see something different. I see a problem. You hired me in part to help build this thing. And here's a problem that I see. And he got the vast majority of things he was right on.
Yeah, he was brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant, life-changing to spend those years with him. I wouldn't take any of it back. But the point is not that I won, because I didn't. I lost. I wasn't persuasive. But I don't look back and have regret. And argumentation gets a bad name. People correlate it to fighting, as you said, which fighting is you lose track of what's the thing you're actually arguing about. Fighting is what happens all the time in your personal life when you're in the middle of an argument and you can't even you don't even remember what you started arguing about. Well, that's the clear sign, as they would say in medicine, pathogenomic. That's the hallmark of this conversation has gone from arguing, where there might be able to be a productive outcome, or at least a articulation of two different points of view.
Right.
Because after I brought that up to Howard, he thought about it a bunch. He ended up sticking with his way until, many years later in the game, but it still got on his radar. But when you're in that moment in an argument and you're like, how did this even start? Where did this argument even begin? It's not arguing anymore. It's fighting. And you got to end that as quick as you can, or you'll pile on damage. And yes, that can happen in organizations. It happens less often in organizations because we don't exhibit our worst behaviors in organizations for, I think, a couple of reasons. One is, you can't fire your family, but you can get fired from your job.
Right. There's a little bit of group stability, like group membership stability that's at risk within organizations.
That's right. Yeah. So you clean it up a little bit. And the other is that a lot of your worst fights at home happen when you're really tired, or when you've had a little bit to drink, or when you're basically not at your best. And I know this sounds insane to say, but more of your best hours cognitively happen at work.
There's also a third reason why we don't tend to argue at work. So, if the group membership is important to you.
Yeah. You don't want to destabilize
not just the fired.
Yeah, sure.
But like actually feeling like a group member and not getting socially isolated or risking being socially isolated, depending on how toxic the group is. But like even in a non-toxic group, like there are forces that basically, if you want to belong to a group and have good relationships, you're more likely to just talk about the things that you all agree upon.
Yeah.
And you don't actually bring up differences because differences are risky, because they may lead to arguments, which may lead to hurt feelings.
Yeah. And that is why we've talked about this before, but there's this upside down U in the relationship between performance and longevity of a group. And it's what Cindy's talking about is it takes a little while of working together before you kind of know how each other click and your performance is good. But then there's this point where you get tight and you really like the people in a lot of cases, and you start pulling your punches because you don't want to destabilize that. And that actually causes the performance to drop, because I'm not telling you, hey, I'm making, not to get too complicated, but I'm making too many external attributions when you screw up. Instead of saying, hey, you could have done that better, I say, well, the timing wasn't right, or that was a hard client. And you stop getting the performance feedback, and you stop actually holding the group to a certain degree of accountability for what's happening. And so the performance can fall. And this is one piece of that. Sometimes as groups get more cohesive, the arguments drop off because you don't want to destabilize the relationship. And so you don't talk about what you should be talking about. And that's why good groups good teams and good relationships need to be able to argue. Cindi and I, we argue all the time.
But we don't fight.
Yeah. We almost never fight. I mean, I can't remember the last time.
You still haven't played a piano for me. So.
I'm saving that for when I really need it. But you have to be able to argue, even when it's maybe especially when it's with people you have a great deal of respect for and people you care about an enormous amount. And that's this word arguing, people think it's negative. And
to the point where when we have used it technically in surveys, we've gotten skewed results because of it. And we had to like turn it around to work-related disagreements, which sounds somehow better because arguing has gotten such a negative connotation to it.
That's right. Yeah, there's a great assessment by, I think, Dominic Infante and Rainser, basically called argumentativeness. But it never got a whole lot of play because people don't want to be argumentative, but it's not a negative trait. And it's been probably 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, but a guy named Craig Weber wrote a book called Conversational Capacity, which is a brilliant idea, very simple, but powerful, of successful groups and teams need to be able to talk about what they need to talk about. And then he goes through a way of measuring that and then raising your capacity, of which I'll summarize and say the single greatest thing you can do to increase your ability to talk about what you need to talk about is to have those conversations, even where they're uncomfortable, and just monitor that it doesn't slip from being an argument to being a fight.
Right. And a lot of the time when we're in the room, that's what we're doing, is we're keeping it on track and making sure it doesn't slip to the best of our ability.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have a lot of benefit of, as external consultants, we're able to ask questions that would be
perceived as a personal insult if it was somebody inside, but like we're legitimately just asking based on data, and we're like, we don't have any personal stake in it. Like we're just trying to make things better.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, I had an example of that just a couple of weeks ago. We was doing a facilitation and we were talking about job titles, and it was for, some of the senior folks in the room, and one person had an old title and it didn't reflect what they were doing. And so we were just listing some of the main things that and like, this is the senior leadership of a company, and these people are brilliant. And I don't throw that around a whole lot. And as we listed his person's stuff and his title, I'm like, look, forgive me for asking a dumb question, but none of this down here sounds like this title up here. Am I off? And they're like, well, yeah, it did. It's a job change. And so we talked another 20 minutes, but eventually we changed the guy's title. And he'd been carrying that for probably 2.5 years. New job, same old title. And it's, we're lucky in that role as the external consultant that we can ask, because we don't have as much to lose either, right?
No.
I mean,
that's one of the benefits of hiring external consultants, is that they can be honest with you in a way that.
Yeah, like, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand. Help me understand. And that can take the edge off some of these conversations. And you can do the same with an internal facilitator if you have somebody trusted on the inside. But the problem with inside facilitators is, number one, you have to find the right person to do that, who will be perceived as neutral. And then number two,
it's very hard to be perceived as neutral.
That person will not have the bandwidth to absorb anything in the conversation. And so if it's your COO is and that's a terrible example because almost nobody's going to think a COO is neutral because got their hands in everything. But if you have one of your department heads, you're going to make the facilitator of a conversation with your senior leadership team. Your rest of your team may get a lot out of it, but that department head won't absorb anything. because they're going to be spending all their intellectual bandwidth managing the conversation.
Right.
Yeah. So they'll be there, but they'll be there in a way that's not the same.
Most of the time it fails on the first one anyway. Everybody has their perception is from where they sit. And, if you're the head of a particular department, you see the organization from the lens of that department.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have reactions to things based on that lens.
Yeah. Yeah. We worked at a fire department. It's been a number of years, but they were what's called, one of the things we assess is low self-monitor, which basically, are you direct? And I would say this group was very direct and very argumentative. And it worked for them.
Yes, they're one of our favorite fire departments.
And they were one of the best, I think,
I think they are the
that basically score the top in your survey for all the fire departments that we've ever measured.
And have always.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's not to say we have other organizations where they're less argumentative. You don't have to be argumentative
to be stellar.
But you have to argue.
Right. You have to have the capacity to do it. And it's not that these people were always having arguments. It's just that anything that came up, they would just throw it down on the table.
Bird dog it.
And
fearless.
they were completely fearless.
Yeah.
But everybody knew it was really just about getting the job done.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I'll say the flip side of that is we worked in an organization run by a argumentative person. And this person, he was a lawyer. And he basically started burning out. We got brought in because his executive senior leadership team was leaving. And they were stunned. Like the CEO was stunned. Like, why are these people leaving? They still got a lot of time on the clock. We just did a succession plan. They said they were going to stay for another 5 years. And basically, we talked to some people and poked around for a little bit and figured out it's because the CEO was burning people out. Too many arguments. Mm-hmm. And it didn't give people time to recover. And they felt like they were always in the line of fire. And we had to encourage that CEO to kind of space out. Like, that person was actually arguing too much. It was beyond the scope of the leadership team to absorb the arguments at that rapid pace. And so that person slowed it down and was able to stop some of the departures. And also, it was nice. They found I would say that person, that CEO, found kind of a new gear, a different way of, different playbook of operating.
Which, that's kind of remarkable all the way around. I mean, we've had other people who were very argumentative, and their response is, well, that's just who I am.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's a remarkable person who was like, okay, I'm driving people out, so my behavior needs to change. Yeah.
And I would say, I don't dispute that we should give praise to people being able to make an adjustment like that. But by the time that CEO was willing to do that.
He'd already done a lot of that. Yeah.
Well, 2 people had left.
Right.
And so there had actually been consequences.
Sure. Yeah. No, I
got
behavior. I got that.
Yeah. And then he didn't fight us on the behavior.
That's the remarkable part.
Yeah. A lot of people, and not to get too far down in the weeds, but a lot of people who fight us on the behaviors that are throwing off problems, that behavior has been successful for them before. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of
so it's very hard to unwind it.
Yeah, very hard.
Hello, musers. Now it's time for commercial break.
Not a lot, but I would say a good chunk of the work we do is help organizations convene high-stakes conversations. That may have previously eluded you. We have some excellent facilitators. Cindy's doctorate is in organizational behavior. Mine is in communication. And so between the two of us and some of the other people we work with and pull in, we have a lot of people who've thought seriously about and had experience convening challenging conversations. It's actually difficult conversations was the topic of my dissertation, which I read, I wrote, and then who read it? I think my aunt and my mom read it probably. That's about it. But
I read it.
did you read my dissertation?
I read your dissertation.
Good. Thanks for doing that. That makes three people who read it. It's online if you want to. Jeffrey Tumlin, Communicating Negative Feedback, an Experimental Study. Google it if you if you're looking for some sleeping material.
He's joking. I mean, it's science.
Yeah. So that was a long time ago, but I've always been interested in difficult conversations, and a percentage of the work we do is to help convene them for companies. If you're needing a way to handle a thorny topic and you want a pair of trusted hands, call us ondemandleadership.com or culture.com.
So how can groups have good arguments? I mean, obviously facilitators one way, but.
Well, I think committing yourself to the basics of difficult conversations are well studied. Here they are. Number one, have the conversation. Number two, go slow. And as your point from earlier, don't seek victory, seek understanding. Have that mindset. Point three, try to encourage openness and discovery and joint problem solving, not defensiveness and combat and fixed sum or zero sum. And when in doubt, use the magic words. What do you think? And let the other person talk. It's the most effective way to keep a person open and engaged in a conversation instead of closed and defensive, is to let them talk and then to listen to what they're saying. Because it's the greatest signal you can send, that you're trying to piece together the understanding.
I think there's a 4.
Go ahead.
So I think you go into any argument with the idea that there might not be a resolution, that it might take multiple conversations, and use your stops. Like when it starts getting off the tracks, just table it for another day. Okay, like I don't think we're making any headway.
Yeah.
And then honoring the stops. So when there is a stop that somebody else has put out there, even though you sense that maybe they put it out there because you sense that you were winning, in a sense. I mean, we don't want it to be like win and lose, but like, conversations have momentum. And so one of the reasons to use a stop is like, it's moving in a direction you don't want it to move in. Well, from the other side, that means that it was moving in the direction they wanted it to move in. And so if the conversation is going how you want it to go and somebody calls a stop, take the stop. You have to honor the stops.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think that I agree with that. That's related to also kind of locking in progress in an argument.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of times arguments maybe have been building for a while. And our tendency, because we like to knock stuff off our list, is think, all right, I can have this argument, it can be over, and then we're good. But to your point, if we make a little headway, there's a little bit of understanding, consider stopping and then picking it back up again later if you need to. And don't try for a comprehensive solution.
And then there's our favorite, which is maybe you don't come to a long-term agreement, but maybe you come to an experimental agreement.
Yeah, sure.
Somebody isn't sure that they like it, but they're willing to try something for a short period of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And you and I do this a lot where we're using the language of experiment, pilot study, trial. And it's our clients find that much more palatable than like it's been a few months, but there's somebody we work with was asked to take a job and he in the same organization, but he didn't really want the job. He's got a good job, but at the same token, it's a step up. And he was asked by the beloved CEO. And so, there's a lot. And so he was wrestling with this and he asked to talk to us. And we let the guy talk probably 10 minutes about his struggle. And then when there was an opportunity to say something, I said, look, why don't you just try the job? Try it for 3 months. Keep the one you have in this organization that was plausible. The person in the job was still in it. So just try it for 90 days. And if you don't like it, go back to what you have. Keep that job. You'll be able to do both. Because the other person was in the job and
so
it's going to stay in it.
Split.
Yeah.
Plus you can pull somebody onto his to try his job as well. So, you get a little balancing all the way around.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it was just like, it's one of those moments where it's not because we're smart. It's just because people don't think about that all the time. Yeah. They don't think about running a little trial. They don't think about running an experiment. We think in terms of either or. Either I have this job or I have that job. Well, do a little experiment, start a little piece of it. And a lot of times in your arguments, that may help people not see the stakes as so high. Because the higher the stakes, the more likely people are to be defensive and slip into a win-lose or a kind of closed off and protective stance. And that's not going to get you, that typically that will impede the conversation. And we want to be having the conversations we need to have and making a little progress, inching towards understanding, so that the lesson learned is we can talk about what we need to talk about, as opposed to we try to have the conversation, somebody gets defensive, we get frustrated, it escalates, we lose track of what we're arguing about, it turns into a fight and some actual damage is done. Then people learn, avoid that person, avoid that topic, avoid that kind of conversation. We can't talk about that here. And the capacity, our ability to talk about what we need to talk about drops.
Right.
Yeah. And that's, I still remember, you'll know that as soon as I tell you this, the most difficult organization we ever consulted for was small. It was only 12 people. But they'd gotten to the point where every discussion that had any seriousness was a fight, which is how a lot of relationships, personal relationships, end. They end when you can't talk about anything. As we talked about before, a lot of those worst behaviors don't happen at work. But in this organization, they'd fallen through that kind of scaffolding. And they were actually fighting about the most basic of stuff. And that project, they had fallen so far that even we were unable to rehabilitate it. And in the end, it took the departure of, it basically took the senior leader leaving and then wiping out.
Kind of the in-group, out-group.
Yeah. I mean, just wiped out the people who couldn't get past the fighting and reconstituting under a new leader, that organization, which is relatively small. But I would say the senior leader left, the CEO left, and then probably 5 people, 4 maybe. So 5 out of 12. I mean, that's 40%. Mm-hmm. And that all happened within 10 months.
Right.
So it's just the complete overhaul of the company. And they rebuilt around the people who had also been fighting, but were able to get past that. And then the new leader was able to encourage much better communication and stop the fighting. Yeah. And so anyway, it's a reminder, even thinking about that now, and that's been probably 12 years ago that we did that project. It's a reminder of how problematic it is when you can't argue. That success isn't the absence of arguing. Success is the absence of fighting and the presence. And occasionally you'll slip and an argument will turn to a fight, but it's okay as long as you shut it down pretty quick. It's like, look, I think we're off track. Let's come back. We'll pick this thing back up a week from now or whatever. Or just stop the behavior, depending on what your role is. Like, hey, let's get back to the point. Let's get away from.
A lot of the time, I think that's a good tool in an argument is basically having your main point down on paper, sometimes just so it's in front of you.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of drift that happens, especially when you add more people into the conversation.
Yeah, sure.
And that anchors you. And usually you can pull people back. It can be like, these are, it's not that we shouldn't talk about those things, but they're not the topic right now.
Yeah.
We need to get back to trying to do this or else we're never going to get anything accomplished.
Yeah.
And that's a true statement because I think most of us have been in like group settings where it's like the drift happened and you're just sitting there like, we keep having this conversation and it continues to drift and it never goes anywhere. And like, it's pretty easy to then just come back and be like, okay, we're afloat again. Let's get back to where we were. Let's get back to putting our focus on this particular problem, even though, yes, all those other problems do in fact exist.
Yep. I'm agreeing with you on that. Yeah. So here's our summary. Argue, but don't fight. Stop thinking of argumentation as a negative. The best companies argue. Try to get at the problems early. And when they sense that the conversation is escalating beyond a point that they can safely de-escalate it, they put it aside and pick it back up again another day. If you're able to talk about the things your company needs to talk about, people learn a very valuable lesson. We can handle that. We can come early with the problems. We can get in front of things. If you don't, they learn the opposite and very counterproductive lesson. And then they begin withholding. And it gives the enterprise a certain brittleness that
you basically are losing
sure
a good portion of your knowledge because the people are only sharing what everybody already knows.
Yeah.
And agrees upon.
Yeah. I'm agreeing with you on that.
We'll take it.
Good. I'm not arguing with you on that.
Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Management Muse, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Management Muse. We are a podcast / YouTube channel that we hope is entertaining and educational. If you are on YouTube, we would appreciate you subscribing and maybe leaving a comment and a like. If you are on any of the podcasts listening to this, we would appreciate stars, following, comments, all the good stuff. We want to say thank you to Christina, Sarah, and Rebecca, and then, of course, everybody at Design at Work. And then just as a last-minute reminder, we also want to mention that we are management and communication professionals working in the field, but also have degrees that back us in science. All that being said, we are talking in generalities on this podcast. We do not actually know your particular situation. So proceed with common sense and maybe a little bit of experimentation on your end. And we hope that you make the world a more beautiful place by making work a more enjoyable place. See you next time on Management Muse.